Hi guys, let's talk more about Qigong. All right, first question from episode 59 from Spectre2434. Hey, question: is the outside in method top down, like energy entries through the crown and pulls the energy down? Okay, I remember that was from the spontaneous movement episode. Yeah. So when you do Qigong a lot, you first memorize all sorts of movements, especially nowadays, whereas the older systems, the movements were actually more simple. And the slower and more simple the movement, the more the energy actually moves, right? But eventually, what you memorize as a movement routine becomes just a framework, and the energy starts to move spontaneously. That happens in post training while you're not moving at all. It happens in sitting static. It also happened in movement practice. So rather you're doing movement qigong, or you're doing sitting qigong, or you're doing standing qigong, providing you go deep enough, you experience spontaneous movement. The first type of spontaneous movement that I talked about was from the inside out. So you start shaking. You don't know why. You start shaking, and then everything just releases. It's really good for the outer layer, like your muscles and your tendons, and stress relief. And all of a sudden, your body just kind of go like that. And then if it goes deeper, the shaking gets more intensive. And that's usually the first sign is the sweat starts to smell pretty bad. And now as I'm blocking or shaking from deep inside you, and suddenly it releases. This kind of shaking is a little bit different, is a lot more intense, and is not really physical releasing of stress anymore, but it's usually something more emotional. Some people will start throwing up, some people will start crying, some people will get really angry. It's usually trauma being released, right? That kind of release work should be done properly under a good teacher to make sure you don't overdo it and drain your central nervous system. It is definitely part of the healing process. Usually lasts, if you practice properly, just a few months. And it's really good for healing. However, the downside is some people get high off it and they get addicted to it, and it could be really bad. If those that are interested, leave a message below for stress relief and also trauma release, and maybe I can do an episode and talk about that because they're really good for that kind of stuff. But your question is really for the second level or a higher level of spontaneous movement, where it's not about you going from the inside out, but rather it's stuff coming from the outside in, which is experienced as literally spontaneous movement. Rather you're sitting or standing or doing moving qigong, there's a sensation that's kind of like 50-50. 50% like you're a musician where you suddenly just don't know where that song come from and you're improvising. So the movements is coming from your subconsciousness. You're starting to make up movements, but you're not trying that hard. It's like a spontaneous inspiration, more or less. That's the first sensation. 50% in the same time, you literally feel like something coming down, moving you, like you're a puppet. As you practice more, the second sensation will start to increase a little bit more and more and more. And you're asking when that happens, does it come through the crown of the head into the central channel, I guess, and pulls the energy down? Yes and no. Of course, it can come down through the head, and that's common as well, but it can also come through the fingers, come through any part of the body, including in the horizontal plane as well as underneath you. May I suggest that, if you're going to start studying spontaneous movement, try your best not to locate what direction it will be, define what it is, and have a fixed border of what's supposed to happen. Because these things kill the ability to be spontaneous. It's kind of like going on a vacation or something, right? And then you plan every single minute out. Well, then it's not a spontaneous adventure anymore, and it kills the joy, right? So, because the type where it goes from the inside out, where you're shaking and healing and releasing trauma, it usually comes with negative emotions, like crying, getting mad, throwing up, feeling years of anger and depression leaving your body. That's the inside out. But from the outside in, it usually comes with euphoric, positive emotions, which is very blissful, very peaceful, and just extremely joyful, right? So this idea of identifying it, seeing what direction is coming from or what is supposed to happen or what their framework is, kind of destroys the joy of it, right? So you want to be a little bit more Taoist about it when you practice Taoist Qi Gong, and that is, don't try to identify it. Don't try to know it. Don't try to control it. And instead of doing that, see if you can frame your mind into what's usually recommended for this type of practice. And that is the framework mentally of gratitude and also curiosity, especially curiosity. So if you can get into a playful curiosity mood when it starts to happen to you, it won't leave you. But as soon as you try to identify it, I notice, especially in the first few months, students always say this, it's the first time it happened, they get so happy, they try to identify it. They try to understand it. They try to analyze it. And as soon as they do that, it leaves. It stops happening. Because now you're not being spontaneous. You can't try to be spontaneous. Instead of doing that, think of it more like you're riding a wave. And when you do that, you can analyze later after the session, right? And it also has its healing ability, but it's a lot different than the type where it's from the inside out where bad stuff is leaving you. It's more a healing in terms of euphoric experience going into every single micro part of your body. And it usually lands into the burner and it comes back up. But that's as far as I'm going to say, so it doesn't become a BS self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So that kind of healing effect, you'd probably be high after a few hours afterwards. Most people are. I suggest people don't drive afterwards when it happens. And you get a giggly, happy feeling that lasts, depending on the individual, it could last for hours or it could last for days. And the more you practice, the more it tapers off. So it doesn't have a spike, but it just becomes a very happy, peaceful feeling. So I hope that answers that question. But before we leave that, let me just erase this part so I don't get too redundant and repeat your question again and again. Okay, so talking about it's fine, but the most important thing is manifesting it so you actually feel better. If you want spontaneous to happen in movement, besides letting go the idea of controlling it and defining it, the most important part from a movement point of view is you first do stillness standing. The container stage, which is nowadays known as high-level internalized training, but in the old days is actually the most basic level, which is holding the ball, sitting like a tree, rooting into the ground, opening up the pores, doing bone breathing and pore breathing. That's setting up the container, right? The more you do that, the more you cultivate a feeling here where it's burning and it's getting hotter and hotter, and the heat starts to fill your body. But it's not the type of heat that's uncomfortable. Some of the things that students have reported around the world, also in my school, also when I first went through it, is you start to get a lot of energy, but a very calm energy. For me, the allergies that I had disappeared, that I had for years, high blood pressure, chronic fatigue, chronic stress, a lot of brain fog at the time. I was really sick. And also I was recovering from illness really fast. So those are some of the symptoms of standing, right? Which I'll sidestep the martial art effect for now. So when you're standing a lot, that happens. That's when you start to feel energy, right? If at that point you're still practicing movement practice, you have in my estimation, easily 50% higher chance of spontaneous movement happening from the outside in that you're talking about. Because once you can feel energy, it's very easy to tap into it, right? It is much easier to feel more powerful energy through standing than through moving. So that's number one. But there's a catch. It is much easier to experience outside in spontaneous movement in movement, not standing. Although it happens in standing later. So you can do movement all day, all the time, but your ability to feel like a lot of power really fast is pretty low. It's much faster to get power or juice in prolonged standing container work. But if you want spontaneous movement, it's much faster to experience it in movement as compared to post-training for most people so far that I've met in the last 30 years. So a smart thing to do is what Taoists usually do, which is they train both. That way, when they're standing post-training, they built the power. They go back to movement practice. Now that they have the power, it's easy to feel it, and now the stuff can come down and start moving them. Then they experience spontaneous movement. At that point in their journey, they plug that back in standing, and now when they're standing, they can start doing spontaneous movement a lot faster than someone that just stands. Because if a guy just stands and holds a container, A lot of time, even after 20 years, spontaneous movement doesn't happen. That's why it's important that in the moving Qigong, standing Qigong, sitting Qigong, and laying down Qigong, none of it is skipped. That way you can plug it into each other. So, and this is important because without spontaneous movement, you're kind of, especially, not so much for the physical chronic fatigue kind of issues that students have, but more for like stress relief and more for anxiety and especially for depression. Without the spontaneous movement, you're really missing, in my opinion, a big part of the healing. Because it certainly really helped me when I was going through emotional stuff that, prolonged standing could not even touch, right? Because once you start doing the spontaneous stuff and feeling that bliss, you can plug it into sitting. That's when the emotional healing really starts. Because when you first start sitting, you're really just calming the mind, getting the blood to go down, leaving the brain so you're not yapping all the time. Once you start going up into this center and things start to soften up, you start to release some bad memories and a lot of stress. And then you go through that detox period, right? If you keep sitting after that, you feel this line here, gets a little bit bright for some people, and you feel this, what's a good word? This sense of bliss and peace. That's really nice. But if you have spontaneous movement from the movement Qigong that we talked about, you can plug it into sitting. And when you experience spontaneous movement while you're sitting, that piece that we just talked about, it just gets cranked up. And that's really good for people that are battling anxiety or depression. And it works really well, at least for me and my students. But if you plug it in, it's not like you mechanically go and screw it in. That's not what I mean. I hope I don't give you the wrong idea. It's that when you obtain spontaneous movement during movement Qigong, when you start sitting, if you just relax the posture a little bit, it'll start to happen by itself because it's spontaneous. So you don't have to plug it in mechanically. So anyways, guys, we're out of time. Please leave your message below because I have a feeling, I hope it'll lead to a deeper conversation because I'm not quite sure if I'm confusing you. But this particular episode is important to me because I see so many people that are sad or anxious, and experiencing how this stuff has worked so well for me and my students, I really hope that, people can do it properly with the spontaneous movement going into the sitting. If you actually want to learn how to do this, please join the Taoist community in my online school. We train once a week in a live stream Qigong class, guided meditation, as well as a live Q&A. And there's a private student forum so I can customize and personalize the instruction. Also, all classes are recorded in the student library. Anyways, see you next time. Have a good night.